We've got the Cambridge Audio EVO 150 Delorean edition streaming integrated amp bench test results. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Hey folks, I'm Gene Delasalo with Audioholics. So I'm happy to have a Cambridge Audio product in for evaluation. We just posted the bench test results on audioholics.com editorial site. I'll put the link in the video description below if you guys want to read the test report. But I thought it was important to actually go over these results because sometimes just looking at measurements can be misinterpreted or not fully understood. So I'm going to do my best to clarify the results of these measurements for you guys. Just want to show you the product real quick. It's absolutely beautiful with this metal finish. It looks like the DeLorean from Back to the Future. This is the premium finish. It's like an extra $100. I think it's $3,200 in this edition, made in a limited quantity. So if you're into this kind of metal look, I would suggest it. They just did the VU meter update on it. You could see the unit playing behind me in the background. It looks absolutely awesome with the VU meters. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen with you guys so you can take a look at these results that we're talking about. And like I said, this is on Audioholics homepage right now. So this is a streaming amplifier. It supports pretty much every kind of audio format you can think of. You can see all the specs here. I'm not going to go over everything verbatim. It uses a very high quality ESS Sabre 9018 DAC, Hypex Class D Encore module, rated at 150 watts, channel into 8 ohms. And just to show you the back of this unit real quick here, it's got two sets of speaker connectors, A and B. Now those are in parallel, so they're not independent zones, but if you do want to run, 4 speakers in a room, if you're running a party or something, you could certainly do that. Just realize that if you connect 2 pairs of speakers, 2 pairs of 8 ohm speakers, for example, it creates a 4 ohm, it presents a 4 ohm load to the amplifier, which this amplifier can handle okay. Just be careful not to, overdrive this. If you're using 4 ohm speakers and running 2 of them in parallel at the same time, it'll present a 2 ohm load to the amp, and I don't recommend doing that. You could also use a speaker B if you have speakers in a remote location. You could switch to those speakers as well. You've got an HDMI ARC input from your TV, so you can stream from all of your apps from your TV directly into this unit. You've got Toslink, you've got coax, and you even have XLR ins, and it has a really good Phono preamp, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And it has preamp outputs as well, USB DAC, you name it. And you can see the insides here. It's got the SMPS power supply with the Hypex Encore module. And this module in particular, it's one of the newer Hypex modules, but it's not like the most high-end one. It's not the most high-power one. It's the NC252MP Class D amplifier. And they use the StreamMagic Gen 4 module to do all their streaming. You can see all the digital circuitry up here at the top. And I want to go over just the preamp outputs on this at first. So if you want to use this, for some reason you decide down the road, you're going to use a pair of speakers that are really power hungry, and you want to use it as a preamp only, you could certainly do that because this has a really good preamp output stage. As you can see in my measurements here, it does clean 4 volts RMS output, and the sine add on it is like 107 dB. And you can see if you want to convert that to percentage, it's like 0.003-ish THD plus N at 2 volts RMS. So it's very clean output. You could certainly use it to power any external amplification you would like. If you need more power, you can do that. I wanted to show you an FFT with a 1 kilohertz tone. The fundamental second and third order harmonics are about 97 dB below the fundamental. Pretty clean overall. I'm happy with that result. And then I look at the SNR. So with a 0 dB FS input, a digital signal input, measuring 2 volts out of the preamp outputs. So this is bypassing the amp section. 111 dB SNR weighted. That's really good. 110 111, anything like that is a really good figure. It's among the best I've measured in any preamp, so I like that right there. The stop band roll off is really good. So if you're sampling a CD red book at 44.1 kilohertz, I look at the attenuation in the stop band above 20K. It's about 120 dB down, which is what we like to see. Little rise in the 60 to 75 kilohertz area. So that's about right where the switching frequency is for the amp module. And that's to be expected. No worries there. The Phono preamp on this really made me happy. Okay. If you look at the frequency response of the Phono preamp, this is a moving magnet. It is flat from 20 hertz out to 50 or 60 kilohertz. Looks like they put a little subsonic filter below 20 hertz, which could be a welcome thing for turntable users to reduce rumble. Nothing to be concerned about there, but a very linear response. Now, moving magnet phono stages, the cartridges run the output voltages anywhere from a couple of millivolts to maybe up to 8 or 9 millivolts, sometimes 10, I think I've seen. I typically test at 5 millivolts. That's a standard. And this thing had very low distortion. You could see right here, it was like 0.002% for most of the band and a little bit higher, 0.03 at base frequencies. Nothing to be concerned about here. That looks really good. In fact, this Phono preamp stage was able to take up to 50 millivolts RMS in without clipping or distorting. That's atypical. So usually when I measure Phono preamps, they don't want anything above 10 millivolts RMS. In fact, the RCAM one, the A25, had a problem with just 5 millivolts input, which I was surprised at, to be honest with you. And the Yamaha, the RN1000A, did similarly well in terms of output distortion and bandwidth. I think this one had a little bit of an edge. I think the Cambridge had a little bit better SNR. I actually measured SNR with 5 millivolts into the Phono preamp, 1 watt out on the speakers. So this is through the entire unit. It got 78 dB SNR A weighted. That's really good. For going through a phono stage out to the speaker outputs, I like that. That's about 3 dB better than I saw on the Yamaha piece. Very clean. I'm happy with that overall. There is a subwoofer output on the EVO 150, but it's not base managed. I think the 3 dB point's like 2 kilohertz. So you're going to want to use the crossover on your subwoofer if you decide to do a powered subwoofer on the sub out. It is a variable output, so it will change volume based on your master volume. You just need to use the bass management in your subwoofer. So let's look at the power amp section. This is a frequency response plot of no load, 8 ohms and 4 ohms. And what you want to see under these conditions is the frequency response should not change. So this is what's called a true load invariant amplifier. The best linear AB amplifiers behave like this, and the very best Class D amplifiers behave like this. Not all Class D amplifiers behave like this. I've measured ones in the past where they were either optimized for 8 ohms or 4 ohms, and you would see the frequency response change accordingly, sometimes minus 3 dB attenuation at 4 ohms if it was optimized for 8 ohms. And then sometimes no load, they would resonate right at the, at the very end of the frequency spectrum, around 22 kilohertz or so. You'd see a big bump. That was problematic in some of the older designs. If you drove them at any voltage levels unloaded, you could potentially shut the amp off or even damage it. This looks the same whether it's loaded or unloaded. That's a really good sign. And what that tells you is that this amplifier will sound consistently good no matter what loudspeaker load you present it. And that's what you want to see with a linear or a Class D amplifier. So kudos there. The Hypex module is truly load invariant. I like that. Now, if we look at the FFT at 1 watt, it looks good. I mean, the at 1 kilohertz, the fundamentals are down. At second order harmonics are down to about 97 dB again. We see some low frequency residuals there. That's some power supply noise pickup, probably because speaker leads are close to the power supply wires or something. Nothing to really be concerned about because it's at like minus 90 dB, but it's definitely not as good as what can be seen in the reference data design from Hypex. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that box, as you saw in that image. There's a lot of electronics packed into a small case. I'm not surprised by this. It's nothing to be alarmed about. Running on power sweep tests at 1 kilohertz at 8 ohms, we're looking at 130 watts a channel, both channels driven at 0.1%, and 148, 150 watts a channel, 2 channels driven at 1% THD plus N. Now, here's the interesting thing about Class D amps, and I'm going to do probably a separate video. A lot of these modules, and I'm not just picking on Hypex, I've noticed a pattern. A lot of these different modules from all the different brands, when they give you their power ratings, they rate them at 1% distortion. It's not like they're rating them at a low distortion level. So 1% is not a great distortion level. That's a 40 dB sinad. I personally like to rate amplifier power right around the knee or before the knee. So if it was me, being the conservative engineer I am, I would call this a 120 watt amp, not a 150 watt amp. But you know, marketing always wins, and they want to give you that instant gratification number. Legitimately, it does 150 watts, but it's at a 1% distortion level. It's okay. I just don't like the fact that they rated it at 150, but I've seen this with other designs. I've seen this with modules from ICE. I've seen this with other modules from various different manufacturers. This is not atypical. And this is what the manufacturer Hypex rates. So I'm not blaming Cambridge on that. Cambridge is taking their references on and putting it into their own product, and they're relying on those specs. So at 4 ohms, this is rated at 250 watts a channel. We get 240 at 0.1% and 267, 268 at 1%. So it's actually exceeding the 250 watt rating. Kudos there. And you know, in both cases, the sinad below the knee has been really good. We're looking at like 95, 97 dB sinad or 0.0015% THD plus N. You can see that's the same whether it's driving an 8 ohm load or it's driving a 4 ohm load. So that's good news all around right there. Now here's where it gets tricky. So some of these Class D amplifiers, when their switching frequency is in the lower region, in this case, it's like anywhere from 50 to 80 kilohertz. Two things can happen. Number one is if you don't properly bandwidth limit the test signal, your device itself can cause slew-induced problems from the switching frequency of the amplifier, and you can get erroneous results. So every test I did was bandwidth limited in the AP with a 22 kilohertz bandwidth to avoid most of that problem. But the other issue that happens, I've noticed with some of these older Class D designs, because the Hypex has been around a while, they put some protection in there because they don't want to overload the output filters. So when you're trying to do these full bandwidth tests from 20 hertz all the way to 20 kilohertz, they can current limit, they can shut off. It's hard to get an accurate rating. In this case, when I ran a full bandwidth test, I got about 135 watts a channel, both channels driven, but that was above 1% THD plus N. So that was a pretty high distortion level. When I backed it off to like 110 watts, both channels driven, I got under 1% distortion. So like I said before, I like rating power before the knee. So if you really want an honest full bandwidth power rating for this amplifier, I'm going to say it's around 110, 120 watts a channel on a good day at 8 ohms. Now, when I tried to repeat this at 4 ohms, it kept shutting the amp off. It just would not have it. So I didn't get any meaningful results to do a full bandwidth sweep at 4 ohms. Now, I know what people are going to say in the comments. They're going to be like, well, that's crap. That means it can't drive a 4 ohm speaker. That's absolutely not true, because Shane Lee actually has one of these in right now, and he's powering a pair of Paralison R series towers, which are 4 ohms, and he's cranking the snot out of it. And he really liked the sound. The amplifier never shut off, never had a problem with that at all. I've got some Revel F328BEs I'm planning to connect to this amplifier. Those are 4 ohm speakers. They dip down to 3 ohms. So I will be doing a separate follow-up on that. And you guys can see how real world testing is much different than bench testing. That's why you never just fully look at the bench test and decide if the product is good or not. The measurements, I got this from Teo Nikolakis. The measurements are the dating portion of deciding on a product. The listening and user experience of the product is the marriage part. That's when you decide ultimately, when you combine those two, if you're going to want, if this product is right for you, if you're going to want this in your reference system. And you're going to get more information from us because we're doing a full-fledged review of this product. I just want to give you the bench test results for now. And if you want to read more about this power stuff, I have some notes in here about that. Another test that I normally do is dynamic headroom, and that simulates music program material. I like to look at burst tests to see what kind of headroom you can get above the continuous rating. What I've noticed on a lot of these Class D amplifier designs is their SMPS power supply is really designed for its continuous rating. They don't design it for the peak rating of an amplifier. And as a result, the continuous rating and the dynamic power rating are often very similar. We don't see an extra power surge by using dynamic power tests with these amplifiers. I saw the same thing with the ICE module and the Marantz. My continuous 1 kilohertz sweep rating was the same as my dynamic. In fact, I couldn't even do the dynamic test on this amp. It just was giving me erroneous results. So I just did not include them. Just realize that there is no, if you rate this amplifier at 150 watts, there's no headroom. But if you say it's rated at 120 watts, you get a dB and a half of headroom. So it's really on how you look at the power ratings. Certainly worthy of a separate video topic that we'll talk about in a future video. But these are the power test results I got here. Overall, they met spec for the most part. For something that weighs 11 pounds that you could fit in the palm of your hands, that's some pretty impressive power numbers, plus all the features that you get with the streaming and the low distortion and low noise. And that's what I want to show you here. So if we're looking at the signal to noise ratio at 1 watt, which is where I like to look at it so you can compare apples to apples. See, a lot of times you look at SNR specs of an amplifier and they'll tell you 120 dB or something, but that's at full power. And if that amp is 300 watts and you're comparing it to an amp that's 100 watts, you can't compare the SNR numbers because they're at different power levels. Putting it at 1 watt puts everyone on equal playing field. And that's where you really care about the SNR anyways. You want to have low noise, low distortion at low power levels where the amp spends most of its time. That way you can hear all the low frequency and low level details of what's going on in your program material. So what we got here with a 0 dB FS input, which is max digital input, and 1 watt out of the speaker output, we got about 89 dB A weighted. That's really good. I like to see at least 80 dB for an amp to be quiet. 90 dB and above is really stellar. This falls right there. Nothing to complain about there. Channel to channel crosstalk was really good. I like to see anywhere from 60 to 70 dB at 20 kilohertz. We see here about 80 dB at 20K and about 90 dB at 10K. And what that tells you is that this amplifier has good channel separation. So you got to preserve your imaging from your speakers. Everything looks really good there. And as I said before, here's the update with the VU meters on it. I love it. I've been testing it with Tidal. Looks really cool to me. So anyway, guys, I hope this clarifies the measured results that we got on this unit. Like I said, we are going to be doing a formal review with listening tests, and I'll link up the videos and I'll put it in the editorial. We're giving you all the information we can possibly give you on this unit. So guys, if you like this video, please hit the thumb up, hit the subscribe. Don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to me if you want to suggest video topics. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.